Good morning. This is Janet from the West End Library in Laurelton, Pennsylvania, and this is Book Review. Today I'm going to talk about an author that I have read all of his books and thoroughly enjoy them, and I'm going to mention Open and Shut, which was his premier book. The author's name is David Rosenfeld. As I mentioned, Open and Shut is the premier book written by David, and it features a defense attorney by the name of Andy Carpenter. The first thing that jumped out at me when I started reading this novel was the fact that Andy had adopted a rescue dog. This is a topic near and dear to my heart and appealed to me immediately. His dog's name is Tara, and she is a golden retriever and figures throughout his book and the 20-plus Andy Carpenter novels that follow. Andy, as mentioned above, is a defense attorney who uses some interesting techniques, with humor being the core ingredient, in the courtroom to try to badger and intimidate witnesses that find prosecutors objecting quite often. The case in Open and Shut, a murder case, is one that is several years old, that his father, who dies in the beginning of the book, had been the prosecutor on. His father had basically made Andy promise to reopen the case and find the accused not guilty. The guilty person, Willie Miller, has been sitting in jail for 7 years and is presently on death row. The previous trial had been considered open and shut, and no one had taken the time to really investigate the case against Willie. Witnesses and evidence, even during the initial trial, were questionable, and as Andy digs deeper, finds that it is even more so. Andy's unique ensemble of staff adds to the unorthodox manner in which he obtains evidence and approaches cases. He begins the defense argument during Willie's retrial, not really having witnesses and not having any idea how he wants to approach his arguments. Edna, his secretary, comes into his office when she feels like it and spends her days doing crossword puzzles. If she could, she would enter competition doing crossword puzzles. His investigator, Lori Collins, is a former policewoman who is very competent, and Andy had had a relation with her until Andy's estranged wife comes back into the picture, expecting things to continue the way they were. The landlord, where his office is located, pays him in watermelon and cantaloupes from her fruit stand for his assisting a relative in a case. His add-on assistant, a lawyer, Kevin, had gotten so disgusted with the practice of law that he opened up a laundromat calling it Lawdromat, and actually would give out advice to people on small issues. But being brought on board by Andy gave Kevin a new look at law and a better appreciation of it, and provided Andy with a competent assistant. In addition to all of this, Andy finds out that his father had left him $22 million. Where the money came from is something that Andy also starts to delve into, and locates an old picture from 35 years prior with his father and 3 other men that Andy soon identifies. As he investigates the picture and the money, his life is threatened, he is physically attacked, and his estranged wife is shot. He locates the widow of one of the men in the picture, who does not want to taint her husband's name because of information she has from 35 years ago. His estranged father-in-law tries to warn Andy from defending Willie, but to no avail. As things progress, Andy finds that the picture has to do with the case in which Willie had been sent to jail on, and is from another bad incident that had happened. The murder victim in Willie's case that he was accused of murdering was a reporter who had been working on a story that she told no one about. That adds another mysterious dimension to the equation. Through his investigation, Andy's team discovers that the lawyer who had defended Willie initially was not a bona fide lawyer, never went to law school, never took the bar exam, and was totally bogus. He had been hired by people back then to cover up any incriminating evidence that did not point to Willie and get him convicted. As the prosecution rests its case, it's time for Andy to begin the defense. The wife of the one gentleman pictured in the 35-year-old photo decides it's time to let the truth be told. She is called as a witness and tells of a horrifying story involving her husband, Andy's father, and the father of the murdered girl's boyfriend. Fortunately, the judge on the case, Judge Hatchett, one that Andy did not initially want to have hear the case, is more compassionate than Andy had known and is willing to put up with Andy's courtroom antics and the introduction of information from 35 years ago, which ties into Willie's murder case. As Andy continues his defense argument, even the prosecutor on the case is beginning to see that Willie was set up. Being injected with alcohol after years of being sober had disastrous effects on Willie, and the needle marks from the alcohol injections being interpreted as heroin needle marks. The jury deliberates for 3 days with open and shut evidence provided by the prosecutor and Andy's new evidence provided from the 35-year-old photo. Following the jury's decision, Andy then finds out that his estranged father-in-law was also involved with the 35-year-old incident. There are 22 Andy Carpenter novels, each one having Tara as part of the cast of characters. David Rosenfeld has other series with other heroes, but I have found that the Andy Carpenter series is by far my favorite. If you enjoy courtroom drama and Andy's unorthodox way of approaching or preparing for a trial and dogs, then grab a cup of coffee, prop your feet up, and sit back and prepare to be entertained. In real life, David Rosenfeld is the proprietor of a dog rescue and has many dogs he and his wife share their home with.